Hey, what's up friends? Baldwin here, back with another speech breakdown. Today we're going to be taking a talk that's very popular on YouTube from Rick Rigsby. Say that 3 times fast. He is a phenomenal motivational speaker. He did a commencement address talking about some of the life lessons he learned from his father, from his wife. It's a really compelling story here that maybe if you haven't seen this video, you're not going to see one of the twists that's coming towards the end. So make sure you pay attention for that. Hey, also make sure if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, like this video, comment on the video below. Let us know some of the key takeaways you learned, but also let us know if there's a video that you would like for us to do a video breakdown of. All right, let's get right into it. Play the footage. Here we go.
The wisest person I ever met in my life, a 3rd grade dropout. Wisest and dropout in the same sentence is rather...
Okay, now let's start with something here. This is a commencement address speaking at a graduation, and so this is going to be a little bit of a different context than what most talks are going to be. So there's a couple things that we can pay attention to. One is, as a commencement speaker, you tend to be kind of trapped to the lectern there, right? Sometimes it's called a lectern, sometimes podium. Lectern is the brown box in front of him there. The podium is actually the stage that he's actually standing on. So sometimes those are kind of used interchangeably by some people, but technically lectern, stage, or podium. You get the idea. So with this, and especially in a commencement address, you're typically like kind of handcuffed to this. I don't really like that format. I think as a speaker, the more you can move around, the more mobile you can be, the better. But in this type of context, he is kind of limited by being there. So it is just kind of like, it is what it is. When you're doing a commencement, if you're doing something like that, you could probably move away from it. I think, again, the more you can move away from it, the better, but typically that's the way it is with a commencement. Another thing I'd point out here is anytime you can avoid people sitting behind you, the better. The reason being is, as an audience, oftentimes they're not going to be necessarily fully engaged and paying attention to what you are saying. Oftentimes they're looking at the people behind you. This is something you want to avoid. Now again, this is a commencement, so it's a different context, so oftentimes they're going to have, you know, these dignitaries or these important people up there with all the robes, and the dude's got like a gold chain there. He's just balling out or something. So sometimes you're going to have some of that, and that's part of it. But again, if you can avoid having people on stage, and a lot of times if I'm working with a client, I'll ask them ahead of time, or even if I get there to the event and I see that there are seats or there's a table or there's something else on stage, I always ask them like, hey, are you planning on having people? Is it okay if, like, while the introduction is happening or right before the introduction is happening, if those people are either able to go backstage or to some reserved seats in the front row or something? I just don't want other people on the stage because, again, huge distraction for the audience. So let's keep watching here.
Oxymoronic, like jumbo shrimp. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he did something really well here that when you're giving some type of talk, oftentimes the audience doesn't know, is this gonna be funny? Is this gonna be sad? Is this gonna be entertaining? Is this gonna be disappointing? We don't know what we're really getting into. Versus, think about the context of if you're going to a comedy show, right? You are going to a comedy show expecting to laugh. You're expecting that, right? When you're coming to a graduation or oftentimes some type of speech or motivational talk, you really don't know, is this gonna be funny? Am I allowed to laugh? Do I have permission to laugh? How does this work? So he uses some humor right out of the gate here that immediately removes some of the defense mechanisms from the audience and helps them to relax. So by saying it's oxymoronic, like jumbo shrimp, which gets a little bit of a laugh, and then the follow-up, the that gets a bigger laugh. Now all of a sudden the audience has put their guard down. My guess is each additional joke he's gonna make here is going to get a bigger and bigger reaction because now the audience has been given that permission to laugh. So that first joke is oftentimes the hardest one because you're kind of breaking the ice and breaking some of the tension there and allowing the audience to laugh. But after that, then the audience is typically gonna be a little bit more relaxed and able to roll with you whenever it comes to humor.
Like fun run, ain't nothing fun about it. Like Microsoft Works, y'all don't hear me. I used to say like...
Okay, now he is, because it's a commencement, he's gonna be wearing the cap and gown and all of that, but did you notice that he's kind of fiddling with the cap? And so typically when you're on stage, you're not gonna be wearing a cap and gown like this, unless it is some type of commencement or graduation. But it is important to be aware of what it is that you're wearing, because those type of things, the more you start to kind of mess with them, the more you're kind of like fiddling with them, the more distracting it becomes for the audience. Now for him, doing that real quick, not a big deal, but if it's something where you're continually having to to address it and deal with it, then it just kind of becomes awkward and weird for the audience. So again, this is just different context, but be aware of that, of what it is that you're wearing and how what your clothing is how it's interacting with the room, with the stage, especially with a microphone. So if you're wearing a lapel mic and you're wearing ladies, if you're wearing some type of jewelry that's clanging into the microphone, something like that, something to be aware of. Or if you're wearing what would be called like a countryman mic, that kind of like the Britney Spears, Garth Brooks looking mic that comes down over your ear. That's the kind of mic I actually prefer, but it can work really, really well if it's fit well to your ear. But if it's not fit well, it kind of like dangles around the whole time and it can be distracting. You're kind of like fiddling with it the whole time. So again, it becomes a distraction and kind of defeats the purpose of having it there. So
country music, but I've lived in Texas so long, I love country music now. I hunt, I fish, I have cowboy boots and cowboy. Y'all, I'm a black neck redneck. Do you hear what I'm saying to you? No longer oxymoronic for me to say country music. And it's not oxymoronic for me to say third grade and Dropout. That third grade Dropout.
Okay, so he's coming back to the transition, setting up from what he began with. So he was talking about what was it, the most important person, the most influential person, or impactful person that he met was a third grade Dropout. Then he makes some jokes, breaks the audience, builds relationship and rapport with the audience. Now he comes back to the meat of it, right? So at the beginning of a talk, you're trying to build that rapport, you're trying to build that relationship. And so a way to think about it is if you've got little kids, there's that saying, what is it, like, and giving them the sugar to make the medicine go down or something to that effect. And so instead of just coming right in and saying, like hammering them with like, I met this third grade Dropout, da 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 da, and like coming in strong with that, and the audience is like, we just met, like give us a second to digest it. He does about 30 seconds there of humor that again builds some of that rapport and connection. So then when he's transitioning back to the more serious content here, now I've earned some trust, I've earned some rapport with the audience, so they're gonna be a lot more engaged with what he says next.
Wisest person I ever met in my life, who taught me to combine knowledge and wisdom to make an impact, was my father. A simple cook. Wisest man I ever met in my life. Just a simple cook. Left school in the third grade to help out on the family farm, but just because he left.
I'm not sure if that video, that little montage there that was just playing, I'm not sure if that was actually being played or if that's something that was done in kind of the post-editing of this particular video. My guess is it was kind of shown later, but that's also something that could be used in an effective way where maybe he shows a picture of he and his father growing up, or even a picture of them today and what that is. And so again, it's nothing that he necessarily has to acknowledge of like, hey, look at this picture. Like if he starts talking about his dad and then the pictures pop up on the screen there behind him, then people, like the audience, can actually put two and two together and know what he's talking about.
School doesn't mean education stopped. Mark Twain once said, I've never allowed my schooling to get in the way of my education. My father taught himself how to read, taught himself how to write, decided in the midst of Jim Crowism, as America was breathing the last gasp of the Civil War, my father decided he was going to stand and be a man. Not a black man, not a brown man, not a white man.
Okay, there's a couple other things I want to point out here. One is, again, look at the people behind him, right? This is where, again, it can kind of be distracting. So the guy with the mustache, the far side there, he's kind of like tossing and turning. It's not like he's restless or anything, but he's just kind of moving around and kind of shifting his weight a little bit. And so again, it can be a little bit distracting for an audience member. I also still can't get over the gold Flavor Flav chain that one bro is wearing right there. That is nice. Now, the other thing I was going to point out is on this video, there's a little bit of background music playing. I'm not sure, again, if this is something that was playing live while Rick was speaking or if this was something that was added in later. My guess is it was added in later, but what I want you to catch is the power of music over speaking. And so it just adds a different element to it. If you watch, and I think there's a couple YouTube videos of this, of watching a movie trailer without any music, it's just dead and lifeless. And so if you add music in a way that makes sense to your presentation, just something kind of instrumental in the background there, it can have a really, really powerful emotional effect for an audience. So again, I don't think this was being played live at the time. I think this was probably added into the video. But again, if we watch this without any music, it'd still be powerful, but adding some background music to it makes it that much more powerful and effective.
White man, but a man. He literally challenged himself to be the best that he could all the days of his life. I have 4 degrees. My brother is a judge. We're not the smartest ones in our family. It's a third grade dropout daddy A third grade dropout daddy who was quoting Michelangelo, saying to us, boys, I won't have a problem if you aim.
Okay, well, one thing he did well there is at the beginning, remember, he kind of set this talk up by the smartest man or the wisest man I ever knew was a third grade dropout. And he's used that line, third grade dropout, third grade dropout, third grade dropout. He's used that multiple times throughout. And again, it keeps hammering that home. So it's good to take some type of like key phrase that you just keep coming back to. And he's done a good job with that here.
High and miss, but I'm going to have a real issue if you aim low and hit. A country mother quoting Henry Ford, saying if you think you can or if you think you can't, you're right. I learned that from a third grade drop. Simple lessons. Lessons like these. Son, you'd rather be an hour early than a minute late. We never knew what time it was at my house because the clocks were always ahead. My mother said for nearly 30 years my father left the house at 3:45 in the morning. One day she asked him, why, Daddy? He said, maybe one of my boys will catch me in the act of excellence. I want to share two things with you. Aristotle said, you are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act. Don't ever forget that. I know you're tough, but always remember to be kind. Always. Don't ever forget that. Never embarrass mama. Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yeah.
Good line.
If mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. If daddy ain't happy, don't nobody care.
Okay, so that's another good place there where anytime that you use humor where the audience can kind of fill in the blank of what it is that you're saying, it adds some humor to it. So he said, if mama ain't happy, and the audience, I couldn't really hear it there, but most people know the finish of that sentence would be, ain't nobody happy, right? If mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy, which is true, right? Happy wife, happy life. And so when you kind of throw that out there and the audience can get there before you say and deliver the line, again, it adds a level of humor and it adds a level of interaction with the audience.
I care, but you know, I'm trying to tell you. Next lesson. Lesson from a cook over there in the galley. Son, make sure your servant's towel is bigger than your ego. Ego is the anesthesia that deadens the pain of stupidity. Y'all might have a relative in mind you want to send.
He might need to repeat that. That's one of those things. Sometimes if you have a line that you say that's just kind of like a meaty, heavy line that you want to like, I really want this to sink in. It's one of those things that like, if you say it too quick and move on, the audience is like, wait a minute, what? Say that again. I need to digest that. So I kind of want to go back just to hear that line again. So that may be one that if you have something that you find the reaction of an audience is like, ooh, that was good. Like, don't rush past that. Like, give that a moment to sink in there with the audience.
Send that to, let me say it again. Ego is the anesthesia that deadens the pain of stupidity. Pride is the burden of a foolish person. John Wooden coached basketball at UCLA for a living, but his calling was to impact people. And with all those national championships, guess what he was found doing in the middle of the week? Going into the cupboard, grabbing a broom, and sweeping his own gym floor. You want to make an impact? Find your broom. Every day of your life, you find your broom. You grow your influence that way. That way you're attracting people so that you can impact them. Final lesson. Son, if you're going to do a job, do it right.
Again, the music's getting a little bit louder. Again, I'm assuming this was added in the post-production of this video. But you can again see that as the music is building, that it makes the talk all of a sudden like, oh, this is getting good, right? So music can really add that element. It's hard to do in a live setting, but in this type of setting, it certainly works when you're adding it in post-production and editing.
I've always been told how average I can be. Always been criticized about being average. But I want to tell you something. I stand here before you, before all of these people, not listening to those words, but telling myself every single day to shoot for the stars, to be the best that I can be. Good enough isn't good enough if it can be better, and better isn't good enough if it can be best. Let me close with a very personal story that I think will bring all this into focus.
Now, if you're going to use that line of let me close with this, or I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up, or let me land the plane, it's good that it helps the audience kind of make that transition. You kind of turned on your blinker, so to speak, and let them know, all right, here's where we're headed now, come along with me. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to say, okay, let's go ahead and wrap up. And then it's like another long amount of time, right? Another 10, 15, 20 minutes, and the audience is like, wait a minute. And some of this is in the context of how long you're speaking. So in this time, it looks like it's about a 10-minute talk or so. So if he wraps up in the next couple of minutes, makes sense, right? But if it's something where he's like, this is a 30-minute talk, and he says, hey, let's go ahead and wrap up, and there's still like another 20 minutes of the talk here, then all of a sudden the audience is just kind of like, it's just kind of like dragging on too long. What you want is when you finish speaking, you want an audience to feel like that was the right amount of time. You don't want an audience to feel like, oh man, I really wish that he could have just trimmed about 10 minutes. If he could have cut that just a little bit down there, a little bit of that fluff, then it would have been a much better talk. You don't want an audience to feel that. You want them wanting more rather than wishing that you'd wrapped up early.
Wisdom will come to you in the unlikeliest of sources, a lot of times through failure. When you hit rock bottom, remember this. While you're struggling, rock bottom can also be a great foundation on which to build and on which to grow. I'm not worried that you'll be successful. I'm worried that you won't fail from time to time. Person that gets up off the canvas and keeps growing, that's the person that will continue to grow their influence. Back in the 70s, to help me make this point, let me introduce you to someone. I met the finest woman I'd ever met in my life. Back in my day, we'd have called her a brick house. This woman was the finest woman I'd ever seen in my life. There's just one little problem. Back then, ladies didn't like big old linemen. The Blind Side hadn't come out yet. They like quarterbacks and running backs. We're at this dance, and I find out her name is Trina Williams from Lompoc, California. And we're all dancing, and we're just excited. And I decide in the middle of dancing with her that I would ask her for her phone number. Trina.
Okay, now he's getting into a personal story here, and I'm a huge fan of stories in general, but anytime it can be a personal, first-person story. Now, he could say, let me tell you about this story from the early 1900s, and there was this guy, and he was interested in this girl, and this guy played football, and this girl wasn't super interested, and like, he could tell that story as like some type of fairy tale, and it's fine, but him telling it from his own perspective of, I lived this, it's much more identifiable and relatable with the audience. So anytime you're telling stories are great, utilize stories as a speaker, but if possible, when possible, as much as possible, make sure you use first-person stories that you actually lived.
Trina was the first one. Trina was the only woman in college who gave me her real telephone number. The next day, we walked to Baskin & Robbins ice cream parlor. My friends couldn't believe it. This has been 40 years ago, and my friends still can't believe it. We go on a second date, and a third date, and a fourth date. We drive from Chico to Vallejo so that she could meet my parents. My father meets her. My daddy, my hero, he meets her, pulls me to the side and says, is she psycho? But anyway, we go together for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. By now, Trina's a senior in college. I'm still a freshman, but I'm working some things out. I'm so glad I graduated in 4 terms. Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan.
Good line.
So now it's time to propose. So I talked to her girlfriends, and it's California, it's in the 70s, so it has to be outside. You have to have a candle, and you have to have, some chocolate. Listen, I'm from the hood. I had a bottle of Boone's Farm wine. That's what I had. She said yes.
Yes.
That was the key. I married the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen in my life. Y'all ever been to a wedding, and even before the wedding starts, you hear this? How in the world?
That's good.
And it was coming from my side of the family. We get married, we have a few children, our lives are great. One day, Trina finds a lump in her left breast. Breast cancer. 6 years after that diagnosis, me and my 2 little boys walked up to mommy's casket.
Oh, dang.
And for 2 years, my heart didn't beat. If it wasn't for my faith in God, I wouldn't be standing here today.
Okay. This is powerful, right? Because again, if he's telling this story from a third-person perspective of, let me tell you this story, this couple met, they dated, they got married, they have kids, and then turns out she has breast cancer. If he's telling the story about someone else, it's sad, but it's gripping, but like he's telling it like, I lived this. And so now all of a sudden, like, you're much more invested in the story of just like, holy crap, how did this guy get through this? So that was an interesting transition there of going from like, it's happy, everything's good, to bam! Now all of a sudden, again, he really has the audience there, and I'm super intrigued to see how this plays out.
If it wasn't for those two little boys, there'd have been no reason for which to go on. I was completely lost. That was rock bottom. You know what sustained me? The wisdom of a third grade dropout.
Comes back to that third grade dropout
of
line.
A simple cook. We're at the casket. I'd never seen my dad cry. But this time I saw my dad cry. That was his daughter. Trina was his daughter, not his daughter-in-law. And I'm right behind my father, about to see her for the last time on this earth. And my father shared 3 words with me that changed my life right there at the casket. It would be the last lesson he would ever teach me. He said, "Son, just stand. You keep standing. You keep standing, no matter how rough the sea, you keep standing." And I'm not talking about just water. You keep standing. No matter what, you don't give up. And as clearly as I'm talking to you today, these were some of her last words to me. She looked me in the eye and she said, "It doesn't matter to me any longer how long I live. What matters to me most is how I live." I ask y'all one question, a question that I was asked all my life by a third grade dropout. How you living? How you living? Every day ask yourself that question, how you living?
Now, you notice here, as he's kind of getting more into it, he's getting more animated, he's getting a little bit more emotional about the story and the presentation. Again, coming back to what we talked about earlier, that when you have that lectern there, you're kind of handcuffed to it, right? And so he's almost like fighting the lectern there, whereas if that wasn't there, I think he'd be able to get even more into it, because it also, that lectern kind of creates a barrier, a buffer between him and the audience. So if that's out of the way, he's able to really even more so connect with the audience. So again, it's the context of a graduation, of a commencement talk, so it's kind of there, you almost have to stand there, but as a rule, try to avoid those, so again, there's no barrier between you and the audience.
Here's what a cook would suggest you to live this way. That you would not judge, that you would show up early, that you'd be kind, that you'd make sure that that servant's towel is huge and used. That if you're going to do something.
Now, one thing he's done really well with this story is anytime you're telling some type of first-person story of something that you've overcome, or some obstacle that you've dealt with, or some challenge you've dealt with, anything along those lines, it's a fine line between making it about you versus saying, here's something that happened, let's make it about the audience. The audience always wants to know what's in it for them. And so the audience is always thinking through 2 questions. So what? And now what? So what? How does this apply to me? And now what? What do you want me to do about it? So Rick's done a great job here of not making the story all about him. It's not like a boo-hoo, woe is me, look at my life, look how sad this situation was, and how I'm now supposed to, function and exist without with the passing of my wife. It's not that at all. It's not like this tragic, sad story. He's really making it to now, here's some life lessons. Here's how I overcame this. Here's how you can continue to move forward in your own life, regardless of what you're dealing with or what you're struggling with.
You do it the right way. That cook would tell you this, that it's never wrong to do the right thing. That how you do anything is how you do everything. And in that way, you will grow your influence to make an impact. In that way, you will honor all those who have gone before you, who have invested in you. Look in those unlikeliest places for wisdom. Enhance your life every day by seeking that wisdom and asking yourself every night, how am I living? May God richly bless y'all. Thank you for having me.
So again, he used that line of how you live, and he used that a couple different places there, but then closing with that, leading all the way up to this culmination of kind of a callback to a key line that he used earlier. So really, really powerful talk there by Rick. All right, there you go. Hope you enjoyed that video breakdown of Rick Rigsby's motivational talk, all about that third grade dropout father that he had, and just the power of overcoming the obstacles that he's dealt with in life. So really, really effective and powerful talk there. Hey, once again, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Make sure that you like this video. Make sure you comment below. Let us know, 1, what is the big takeaway that you had from the video lesson that you learned, and 2, even though I already threw up the 2 there. Also, make sure that you let us know if there is a talk you would like for us to break down. Drop that in the comments below. All right, thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time, my friend.